Howdy, folks around the world. I'm aware I dipped back into a phase of anger and perhaps even bargaining a week or two prior. That happens, although in most cases, I live in acceptance. And it was another YouTuber whom I just forgot the name of, published on YouTube about the methane bomb and carbon dioxide levels reaching new highs, and basically just sort of reminding us that he lives in Santa Barbara, California. Many of you may watch him, but the name leaves me for a second. About how our actions matter now. Be kind to people you meet. Just have compassion, because every little small action matters now. So just for good measure, I'm going to read a publish here made in 2014 by Carolyn Baker on ourworld.unu.edu, brought to us by the United Nations University. Sounds somewhat accredited, so I'm just going to put this out into perspective for everybody so we can all be on the same page. Again, this is by Carolyn Baker, and the title of this article is called Welcome to Planetary Hospice. It begins, quote, "Recently I've noticed some longtime environmental activists verbalizing a new perspective on climate change that some would label as defeatist. Dave Pollard, for example, says this: no one is in control. The enemy, if there is one, is not a cabal of elites, but a set of codependent collapsing systems that every one of us has a vested interest in trying to perpetuate. Systems we have all helped co-create and are almost all dependent on. The question we must ask ourselves, I think, is this: if we acknowledge that our systems and hence our civilizations cannot be reformed or saved, what can we do now that will make a real difference for the future or in the communities for those we love?" Or how about this from Wynne Stevenson, writing in The Nation: "In the dishonesty, the deception, stop lying to yourselves and to your children. Stop pretending that the crisis can be solved, that the planet can be saved, that business more or less is as usual. What progressive environmentalists have been doing for 40 odd years and more is morally and intellectually tenable. Let go of the pretense that environmentalism as we know it, virtuous green consumerism, affluent low-carbon localism, head-in-the-sand conservatism, feel-good greenwash capitalism comes anywhere near the radical response our situation requires. The question is not whether we're going to stop global warming or solve the climate crisis. It's whether humanity will act quickly and decisively enough to save civilization itself in any form worth saving. Isn't this just giving up or giving in, the pathetic whining of defeatists? I don't think so. To me, these new perspectives are utterances of surrender, but also of extraordinary courage. To explain what I mean, let's take the standard agenda of those who want to do something about climate change. That agenda states that everyone must agree that climate change is happening, understand that the situation is so dire that humanity's living arrangements must radically be altered, and sacrifice their economic security and industrial profits to significantly reduce emissions. The problem is that none of these steps will reverse global warming, because more than 30 self-reinforcing feedback loops make this process irreversible. So using activism to end catastrophic climate change, defeat capitalism, and prevent the extinction of species, including our own, is not going to be good enough. Instead, we should ask a different question. Are we willing to Are we willing to put love into action even if we ourselves don't physically survive? The answer is yes. Then two things are essential. First, bearing witness to the deepening horrors of climate chaos. And second, committing ourselves to compassionate service to all the other living beings, since they are going to suffer with us. By practicing good manners towards all species, we can make their demise easier along with ours. Very often, people who receive a terminal diagnosis report that while the initial announcement was heartbreaking, terrifying, and profoundly unfair, they also experience a kind of liberation in the process, learning that they only had a limited time to live, altered every aspect of their lives, particularly their decisions about how they wanted to engage with the remainder of their days and their relationships with other people. In the same way, accepting the reality of near-term extinction is liberating and agonizing at the same time. It's liberating because beyond our own physical survival, something far more meaningful and momentous becomes available to us, and a new form of activism. Of paramount importance to this new form of activism is how we deal with grief. Conscious grieving is an integral component of the maturity required to balance compassionate action with the discerning acceptance of our predicament. For hundreds of years, members of the Dagara tribe in West Africa have practiced grief rituals because they believe that both the earth and the community needs periodic releases of emotion. Without doing so, they say the heart becomes hard, which is toxic for the community. Always a collective rather than a private ritual. The Dagara reported that grieving together solidifies the community and makes conflict resolutions easier. Perhaps more surprisingly, members of the tribe also experience a deepening of joy. In his book, Entering the Healing Ground, Francis Weller shares his conversation with the Dagara woman immediately following a grief ritual who displayed a radiant smile and seemed to exude joy from every pore. When he asked her how she could be so happy, she replied, "I'm so happy because I cry all the time." Her response echoes the profound words of William Blake, "The deeper the sorrow, the greater the joy." Recently, I was personally shaken by the death of my longtime activist and friend colleague Mike Rupert. After decades of political struggle and physical health challenges, Mike has took his own life on 13th of April 2014. Thousands of people attribute their awakening to our planetary predicament to Mike's efforts. The legacy he left is enormous, yet everyone close to Mike witnessed the reckless abuse of his body and emotional wounding which ravaged his psyche, finally leading to his suicide. As with many activists, Mike was only capable of surrender by terminating his physical life. He had every right to choose that path, but I believe his demise is a cautionary tale against what I call heroic activism. Heroic activism is activism in which we do not grieve, invariably leads to burnout and compromised bodies and psyches rather than being self-indulgent. Conscious grieving and other forms of self-care are important spiritual practices that honor and protect the bodies and minds required to advance the work that needs to be done to prepare society for end of life as we know it. With practices like these, the coming catastrophe, which we are now in, does not have to result in widespread fear, panic, dread, or hostility. Instead, we should think of ourselves in the earth as entering a hospice. Many people who have spent time in hospice report that it has been the most meaningful in their lives. It provided a sacred space in which to reflect deeply on their lives, to evaluate relationships that were enriching, to make amends and restitution with respect to relationships that were difficult and painful, to provide service to others in their hospice environment, and to prepare mindfully and reverently for death. On a much bigger scale, this is what needed to be done. This is what needed as a response to climate change. The great dying cannot be practiced in isolation. Never before have human beings been required loving community to the extent that they do now. Does this mean giving up or giving in? Not at all. Instead, we must live life as if every act, every task, and every kindness expressed to oneself and others might be the last. Live and act with gratitude, generosity, compassion, service, and an open heart that is willing to be broken over and over again. It's time to ask admission to Planetary Hospice and to become hospice workers for the Earth community. End quote. There you have it. Be kind. Your actions matter now. And I appreciate your support. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.